Welcome to Dad's Revenge, where quiet men prove that patience is a strength. Each story here is about a father who is underestimated, disrespected, or betrayed by the very people who should be protecting him, and how that father finds his own way to mend things. Welcome to today's story.
Before I tell you what was on that laptop, I have to carry you back about 2 hours to my own kitchen, because if I start anywhere else, you're going to walk away thinking I was a fool. And maybe I was. But I would like you to see how a thing like this gets done to a man before you decide. It starts with a cup of coffee. The coffee tasted right that morning, clean all the way down, with none of that bitter edge underneath it that I had long ago stopped being able to name. I stood at my kitchen counter, holding the cup in both hands, and I thought, well now, that is strange. For 5 years, I had blamed my slow mornings on age, on grief, on burying a daughter too young. Not once had I thought to blame the cup. The light was coming up over the east rose the way it does in October, low and yellow, laying itself down between the trees in long bars. From my kitchen window, I could see maybe 60 acres of it, pecan trees in straight lines, 90 years old, some of them, older, their tops already going gold at the edges. Harvest was 2 weeks out. I had been walking those rows since I was 9 years old. 400 acres of Mississippi Delta bottomland just outside Mound Bayou. My grandfather bought it in 1951 with cash money counted out on a white lawyer's desk in bills so worn they felt like cloth. On the mantel in the front room there was a glass jar with red dirt in it, dirt he dug up the day he signed. He gave it to my father, and my father gave it to me, and the whole of what was said when he handed it over was 4 words: not 1 acre. Ever. I had kept that promise for 41 years. But something had been happening to me, and I could not put my hand on it. My thinking had gone thick. I would walk into the equipment barn and stand there trying to remember what I had come for. Some mornings I could not hold a thought from the front of a sentence to the back of it. I told myself it was 70 years catching up. I told myself it was Kennedy. My daughter passed in 2016. There is no version of that sentence I have found a good way to say. After she went, a lot of things in me got quiet. And when the fog came a few years later, I let myself believe it was just the grief settling in for good, the way it does with some men. I heard the suitcase before I heard her. That small, hard rolling sound coming down the hall stairs, wheels on old pine. 7:45, right on the minute. Carla came the way she always came, unhurried, every movement looking like she had walked through it once the night before to make sure it fit. My daughter-in-law was 38 years old, dark hair pulled back flat and smooth. She had come into this house 6 years back as the rehabilitation aide they sent out for Demetrius. And then she was around on weekends, and then, inside 18 months, she was my son's wife. She was organized. She was capable. I do not believe I ever once saw her flustered. She set the suitcase by the front door and came into the kitchen. "Your morning one is the small white tablet," she said. She opened the plastic organizer she kept on the shelf beside the refrigerator, took out the Thursday compartment, and set it on the counter in front of me with 2 fingers. She placed it the way you would lay a document down in front of a man you needed to sign it. "And do not skip the afternoon one. You know how you get." "I know," I said. She smiled at me then. It was a whole smile. The corners went up, the teeth showed. Her head tipped a little to the right, everything a smile is supposed to do. But her eyes stayed exactly where they had been, flat and level and working. I have thought about that smile a great deal since. It was not put together from the inside. It was laid on from the outside, like paint. "I will be back Sunday evening," she said. "The women's retreat is at the lodge outside Grenada. I wrote the number by the phone in the hall in case yours goes out on you." "You have told me 3 times this week," I said. "I am only being thorough." She lifted her handbag off the chairback. There was food in the freezer, and I marked what is what. Miss Villalobos will come Tuesday and Thursday to clean. Demetrius has everything he needs upstairs. And here is a thing I have to say plain, because leaving it out would make me look better than I was. 3 Sundays before that morning, standing in the yard after service with a paper plate in my hand, I told Pastor Mackenzie that I did not know what I would do without that girl. I said it with my chest out. I said she counts out my pills every week of her life, Reverend. She drives me to every appointment. She sits right there in the room with me so nothing gets missed. Said the Lord looked after me when he sent her. Pastor took my hand and said, Amen. And I meant every word, and I went home proud. She did not kiss my cheek that morning. She did not stop in the doorway. She took the handle of her suitcase and stepped out into the yard, and the door came shut behind her with a soft click. I have heard that door shut 10,000 times. That morning, it did not sound like a door closing. It sounded like a lid going down on something. I stood at the window and watched her put the bag in the back of her car. She checked her phone once and slid it into her jacket pocket. Then she backed down the gravel past the equipment barn, past the mailbox, and out through the gate. And the dust hung there a while after she was gone. The house went quiet. I picked up my coffee and drank some more of it, and it was still good, and I still could not tell you why that bothered me. I found myself thinking about that pill organizer on the shelf, about how she had set this morning's dose down in front of me without ever asking whether I wanted it. I thought about Dr. Pratt, who had taken over my care when old Dr. Whitmore retired on Carla's recommendation. In 6 years of appointments, I had never once been in a room alone with that man. She always came back with me. Family support, she called it, making sure nothing gets lost, and standing there in my own kitchen with a cup of coffee that tasted the way coffee is supposed to taste, I felt something turn over in my mind and start to come forward. Something about the pills and the doctor and how long it had been since I had been alone in a room with either one. But it would not come the rest of the way. It never did. Every time one of those thoughts got close to the surface, another voice would rise up underneath it, tired and reasonable and sounding exactly like my own. Reuben, you are 70 years old. You are suspicious of a woman who has done nothing but take care of you. That is why she helps. I set the mug down on the counter. Out in the front room, I could see the corner of the mantel and the jar sitting on it, and the red dirt inside gone dark the way it does over 70 years. That is why she helps, I said out loud to nobody. I was still standing at that counter when I heard it. Footsteps. Not the sound I had trained my ear to over 7 years. That shift and drag of a man moving himself in a chair, the small grunt of a wheel catching on a threshold. These were footsteps. Heel and then toe. Weight going down full on the boards and coming up again clean. The way a man walks when he has walked his whole life and never thought about it once. Moving down the upstairs hall, right over my head. I did not move. I want to be honest about that. A younger man might have called out or started for the stairs. I stood in my kitchen with both hands flat on the counter, and I listened. And what I felt was not hope. It was something closer to what you feel when the ground moves under you, and you have no name for it yet. The footsteps came to the top of the stairs and started down. Slow. Not careful the way a hurt man is careful, but careful the way a man is when he does not want to be heard by the wrong ears. 14 steps in that staircase. I counted every one of them without meaning to. Then he was in the doorway. My son. 41 years old, his mother's eyes, and my jaw, and standing. Both feet flat on my kitchen floor. No chair behind him. No crutch, no brace, no hand on the frame to hold himself up. His shoulders were square and level. He was looking at me the way a man looks at somebody he has been waiting a very long time to talk to. I did not say anything. I could not find where I had put the words. Understand something. For 7 years, I was the one who moved that man. Every morning I went up those stairs and got my arms under him and brought him down. I knew the exact weight of my son. I knew how his knees hung and how his heels caught on the runner in the hall, and how his hand would come up and take hold of my shirt at the shoulder when we started down. There is a kind of knowing a man gets from carrying a person. I had that knowing, and every bit of it was wrong. Because I had been there. I had stood in that hospital corridor in Cleveland in March of 2017 while they brought him in off the helicopter. I had sat by that bed 11 days. I had signed forms and shaken hands with surgeons and listened to a woman younger than my daughter explain to me kindly, in a small room with a box of tissues on the table, that the damage to his spine was likely permanent, and that I should begin thinking about the house and what would need changing in it. I had built him a ramp. I had widened 2 doorways with my own hands. I had carried that man up out of the truck seat more times than I can count. The refrigerator kicked on behind me. That is the truth of it. The most impossible thing I had ever seen was standing in my kitchen doorway, and the refrigerator kicked on and hummed the way it does, and outside somewhere down the row, a mockingbird was going through everything it knew, and the yellow light was still coming through the window onto the counter in those long bars. The world did not stop for it. The world went right on being an ordinary Thursday morning in October. Amora came into my head right then, which made no sense at all. My wife had been in the ground 4 years by that morning. But what came to me was her standing at the bottom of those same stairs the last summer she was well, wiping her hands on a dish towel, saying something up to me that I have never once been able to get back. Just the shape of her down there in the dark of the hall. Then it was gone again, the way those things go. Demetrius I said. It came out wrong. Too quiet and too even, like a man reading a name off a list. He crossed the kitchen in 4 steps. 4, I counted those 2. He took hold of my arm above the elbow, and his grip was gentle, but it was not asking me anything. It was the hand of a man who had already decided what was going to happen next. Not here, he said. He said it just above a breath. She has ears in this house. Ears, I said. Daddy? He looked at me, and he did not blink. Every room but 2. Come on. Now I have thought about this part more than any other. There was a moment, maybe a second and a half of it, where I could have pulled my arm back. I could have said, no, sit down, tell me right now, in the kitchen, in the light, like a man. 70 years of doing things my own way was standing right there at my shoulder, telling me to plant my feet. I went with him. I could not tell you today whether that was faith or whether it was the fog. I have decided to believe it was faith. He took me out through the back, through the washroom where my coat has hung on the same nail since Amora was alive, and out the service door on the north side, where the crepe myrtles have grown up thick along the wall. He did not go across the open yard. He kept us tight to the building and then tight to the hedge, and I understood without being told that we were staying out from under something. And I thought about the camera up under the eave of the equipment barn. The little red light on it had quit blinking sometime the winter before last. I had noticed it. I had told myself twice to call the company about it, and I never had, and I could not now remember why not. Walking along that wall behind my son, I thought about that dead red light with a whole different kind of attention. We went out past the ramp. I built that ramp myself in the spring of 2017 out of pressure-treated lumber, with a rise gentle enough that a man might take it on his own someday if he ever got strong enough to try. I sanded the rail down by hand so he would not catch a splinter on it. 7 years it has sat there, going gray in the weather. That morning, my son stepped off the end of it without laying a finger on the rail, and neither one of us said a word about it. The air outside was cool and had that smell it gets in the Delta before the sun takes hold. Wet dirt and cut grass and something green underneath. We came around the equipment barn and out past the shop, and there they were, the east rose opening up in front of us in the low light. He walked me into the trees. Under my boots, the ground was already covered with them, the early drops, and they went off like small dry shots with every step. 70 years I have known that sound. It is the sound of a good crop coming, and it has meant nothing but good news to me since I was a boy. That morning it sounded like something else entirely. There is a bench out in the middle of the east rose that my father set there in 1978, 2 cypress planks on a pair of creosote posts, and it has never once been moved. Demetrius sat down on the end of it and put the laptop across his knees. He did not open it right away. He sat looking out down the row, the way a man does when he is deciding which end of a thing to pick up first. She ran a check on the house system back in the spring, he said. His voice was low and level. The Grove is not on the house network. She pulled up the panel, saw nothing listed out here, and quit looking. He tipped his head maybe an inch toward the third tree in from the turn row. There was a little black housing up in the crotch of it, no bigger than a bar of soap gone the same gray as the bark. Its own battery, he said, its own signal. She has no idea it is there. I looked at that camera a long moment. Then I looked at my son sitting on my father's bench, with a computer on his knees and both boots flat on the ground. And I started to understand that I was not looking at something a man decides to do on a Tuesday. I was looking at years. "How long have you been at this?" I said. He did not answer that, not straight. He set his hand flat on the laptop lid and he said, "Before I show you anything, you have to know the truth about that day at the warehouse. Now." I had told myself the story of that day so many times that it had gone smooth. There is a pecan shell that lies in the turn row, long enough, gets run over enough times by the tractor and the truck, and after a few seasons, it comes up under your boot, flat and pale and worn down to nothing, no ridges left on it at all. That is what that day had become in me. All the edges gone. Every place where a question might have caught, sanded right off. March of 2017. The old cotton warehouse on the south end of the place, the one we were putting in cleaning equipment. There was a loft platform in there, steel bolted into the frame where the elevator head was going to mount. My son went up on it, and it came down with him. Accident. That was the word. It was in the incident report, and it was in the insurance file, and it was in the mouth of every man who came up to me at church for a year afterward and took my hand and shook his head. A terrible accident. I heard it so many times I stopped hearing the parts of it. It just became the name of the thing, a box with a label on it put up on a shelf, not needing to be opened again. Demetrius looked at me across the top of that laptop, and he said I had a truck coming that morning, 6:30 delivery. That is why I was down there early. I remember I said, "You had told me at supper that Sunday you were going down to look at the loft before the crew got in." He stopped a second. I went up on it first to check the mounting grid, so you would not have to climb it. The wind came through the tops of the trees then and went on down the row, and a few more of them dropped somewhere behind us, and neither one of us said anything for a bit. The anchor bolts on the outboard end of that platform were gone, he said. Not loose, gone. Somebody pulled them the night before and set the plates back so it looked right from the floor. I sat there. I signed that incident report myself, 2 pages. I read them the way I read everything twice, sitting at my own kitchen table with my glasses on, and I signed at the bottom and I mailed it in. 7 years that piece of paper has been in the second drawer of my desk, with my name on the end of it, calling the thing an accident in my own hand. "If it had been you that stepped out on it instead of me," he said, "at your age, from that height." He did not finish it. He did not have to. I want to say what that was like, and I am not sure I can do it honestly. It was not grief. Grief, I know. This was something else. It was the feeling of a man looking at a photograph he has kept on the wall for 40 years and seeing all at once that there is a second person standing in the background of it, and that they have been standing there the whole time. Somebody had gone out to my place in the dark. Somebody had climbed up in there with a wrench and taken out the bolts that held that platform in the frame and set the plates back so it would not show, and then gone home. Not carelessly, not by chance.
with a good idea of exactly who was going to walk out on that steel at 7 o'clock the following morning.
Not my son.
Demetrius got there first, went up early on a job that was not his to do, and stepped out onto a piece of steel that had been made ready for me. He took that fall in my place. 7 years in that chair, and 4 of them, I was only right then beginning to understand, 4 of them, he had not needed it at all. Carrying this around with him every single day, sitting across the kitchen table from me every morning of his life with it, while I buttered my toast and complained about the price of diesel. A leaf came down between us, one of the big yellow ones, turning over twice on the way. It landed on the laptop lid, and Demetrius picked it up by the stem and set it on the bench beside him, very carefully, the way you would move something that belonged to somebody else. Off past the tree line, a truck went by out on the county road, and the sound of it came to us late and thin. I could smell the dirt, and I could smell the leaves going, and underneath both of those, faint the diesel on my son's hands. I put both my palms down flat on my father's bench, and I left them there until the grain of the wood was solid under them. "Son," I said, and my voice came out lower than I meant it to. "How long have you known?" He looked back at me, steady, not angry, not the kind of hurt that has to come out of a man right away. Something quieter than that, and a good deal harder, the look of somebody who has been living alongside a bad truth long enough to carry it without it bending him. "I started putting it together about 4 years ago," he said. "Small things first, then not so small."
"And you know who I said?"
"Yes, sir." He put his hand on the laptop lid again. "I have had his name for 4 years, he said. He turned the laptop around and set it on the bench between us. It was a photograph, not a snapshot. One of those pictures a man pays to have made. Gray backdrop behind him, jacket with no tie, chin come forward just slightly. A white man, somewhere past 50, with sandy hair going back off his forehead, and a smile on him that I would call friendly if I saw it from across a parking lot, and would call something else entirely from 3 feet away. Under the picture was a name, Cade Franklin. I did not need my son to tell me one thing about him. That name came into my chest the way a sound does in a dark house when you already know what room it is coming from. The body gets there before the mind does. I felt my jaw set without deciding to set it. "I know that man," I said. "Yes, sir," Demetrius said. "I know you do." October of 2014. He came out to the place on a Tuesday afternoon in a truck that had never hauled anything in its life. I was out at the shop with the grease gun in my hand, and I watched him get down out of it and stand there in the yard. And the first thing he did before he said one word to me was turn all the way around and look at my trees. I have had men look at this place a lot of ways over the years. Buyers look at it one way, neighbors look at it another. Cade Franklin looked at my grandfather's trees the way a man looks at a hog on the scale. Then he came over with his hand out and told me he had been admiring the property for some time. We sat on the tailgate of my truck for about 20 minutes. He was pleasant. I want to be fair about that because it matters to what came after. He knew things. He knew what a good pecan bottom yields in a strong year, and he knew what the Delta ground was going for by the acre. And he had a figure ready before I asked for one. It was a big figure. It was more money than my father ever saw in his whole life laid end to end. I told him no. He asked me to think about it. He said a man my age ought to consider what he was leaving his children and whether 400 acres and a payroll was a gift or whether it was a weight. He said it kindly. That is the part I have gone back to the most. I told him about my grandfather. I do not know why. Something in the way he said, "wait," put it in my mouth. I told him a man walked into a lawyer's office in 1951 with cash in a paper sack because no bank in the county would sit down with him, and bought 400 acres, and that there were men living then who did not care for it and let him know they did not care for it, and that he held it anyway. I said so when you asked me to think about it, understand you, are asking me to think about him. Cade Franklin listened to all of that with his head tipped and his hands folded on his knee. He did not interrupt. When I was through, he looked out at the rows for a second, and then he stood up off my tailgate and brushed the seat of his pants off. "That land is going to be mine," he said. "You just do not know it yet." He did not raise his voice. There was nothing in it you could take to anybody. It was not a threat the way a threat sounds. It was a man telling me the weather for Thursday. And then, because my father raised me a certain way, I walked him out to his truck. I stood there, in my own yard, and shook that man's hand and told him to drive safe. I have thought about that more times than I would like to admit to you. He got in and he left, and I went back to the grease gun, and I told myself that was the end of Cade Franklin. Demetrius reached over and brought up something else on the screen. A list. Columns of it, counties down one side. "He does not farm," Demetrius said. "He has never farmed a day in his life. What he does is, he finds ground that has been in one family a long time, and he finds the crack in it." "What crack?" "There is always one," Demetrius said. "Old man dies without a will, and the land goes to 9 heirs at once, and one of those 9 can be bought, and once he has a piece, he can force the whole thing to sale. Or the taxes go 3 years behind because somebody in a nursing home did not open the mail. Or a man borrows against a bad crop year." He pointed at the screen without touching it. 6 counties on that list, Daddy. 14 properties in 19 years. Every one of them a family that had held that ground since before either one of us was born. I looked at that list a long time. There are places on it I have driven past my whole life. There is one about 11 miles from my own gate that I remember when the Duke family had it, and I remember the year the sign changed, and I remember thinking nothing of it at all. He scrolled down to the bottom. "Ryland Bravo," he said, "Bolivar County. 640 acres. I knew the name. Not the man, but the name, the way you know names in the Delta. Something about a foreclosure. Something about him passing. Demetrius told it to me flat, the way you would read off a shipping manifest, and I understood that he had made himself able to say it that way on purpose. Franklin got a piece of the Bravo ground through an heir in 2006. Then came the lawsuits. Boundary suits, drainage suits, a suit over a road easement that had not been questioned in 60 years. 19 filings in 22 months. Every one of them Bravo had to answer. Every answer cost him money he was making off cotton and beans. He mortgaged the home place to pay lawyers to keep the home place. He died in the spring of 2008, Demetrius said, 61 years old. Heart. They found him in the equipment shed. And Franklin bought it. At the courthouse steps, Demetrius said. 41 cents on the dollar. I sat there on my father's bench, with the sun coming up warm on the side of my face now, and the leaves going yellow over my head. And I looked out at 400 acres of my grandfather's trees. "We were not the first," I said. "No, sir. We are just the biggest." "Yes, sir," Demetrius said. "And there is one other thing about him you need to know before I show you the rest." "What is that?" Demetrius closed the picture of Cade Franklin and sat back. "He does not do it himself," he said. "Not the close part. He never has. He finds somebody, and he trains them up, and he puts them inside the house. Carla was not luck, Daddy," he said. "She was placed." I heard the word, and I did not do anything with it right away. There are things a man can take in through his ears and set down somewhere and not open for a minute or two, and that was one of them. I sat and looked at the turn row. "Say that again," I said. "She did not come to us," he said. "She was sent. He found her, he brought her along, and when the time came, he put her in this house." "The agency," I said. He nodded slow. "The agency is real. The license is real. But that referral did not come off a rotation. Somebody made a call." He tapped 2 fingers on the laptop lid without opening it. "I have got the call. I want you to understand how she came to us, because if I skip that part, you will think I was a fool. And I have decided I am going to tell this straight, even where it does not flatter me." It was February of 2018, 11 months after the warehouse. That was the worst stretch of my life, and I have had some. Amora was gone. My girl was gone 2 years by then, and my son was upstairs in a bed he could not get out of by himself, and I was 63 years old trying to run 400 acres and get him to Jackson twice a month and cook something that was not out of a can. I was not sleeping. There were mornings I sat in the truck at my own yard for 20 minutes because I could not think of which end of the day to pick up.
Then a car came up the gravel and a young woman got out with a folder under her arm.
And she was good, I have to say that. I have turned it over 100 times, looking for the place where I should have seen it. And the honest answer is that for the first 2 years, there was nothing to see because she did the work. She got him on a schedule. She got him eating. She learned the names of every man on my crew, and she learned which ones had grandbabies. She fixed the drain in the downstairs bathroom herself with a wrench out of my own shop. The 3rd or 4th week she was coming out, she called me Daddy Reuben in the kitchen, just in passing, handing me a plate, just the way a young person does. I did not say anything about it. I did not correct her. I had buried a daughter 14 months before that. There was a chair at my table that nobody had sat in. And you can tell yourself you are a strong man and a church-going man, and that you have made your peace. And then somebody stands in your kitchen and says a thing like that in an easy voice, and something in you that you had shut off comes back on. That was the crack. Cade Franklin did not have to find it in a courthouse record. It was standing right there in the yard with a grease rag in its hand. She married my son in the fall of 2019. Small service at the church, 30-some people. I gave a toast. I've thought about what I said in that toast, and I am not going to repeat it here. Demetrius was quiet a minute. Then he said, "She never touched me, not once in 5 years. Not out of cruelty, just there was no reason to." I looked over at him. "I was not the one who had to be handled," he said. He said it plain, but I heard what it cost him to say it plain. To her, I was the reason she got in the door. That is all I ever was. And then he laid the rest of it out, and it was all small, and that is what made it awful. She took over the mail in the spring of 2019, just to help. Bills got paid on time, which they had not been. Then she was driving me to the doctor because it was foolish for me to drive myself to Jackson and back. Then old Dr. Whitmore retired, and she had a name ready, a man on this side of the county who could take me sooner. Then she was in the room with me at the appointments. Family support, she called it, and every one of my friends at church said, "Reuben, you are blessed." And then she was counting out my pills. Not one of those things is a crime. You could stand every one of them up in front of a judge, and he would ask you what your point was. Put them in a row in the order she did them, and they are something else. They are a hand moving very slowly across a table toward the thing it came for. And she worked it in front of people. Homecoming Sunday 2 years ago, she brought 2 sweet potato pies to the fellowship hall and stood up when Pastor McKenzie asked the visitors to stand, and she put her hand flat on my shoulder while she did it. Sister Rice came over afterward and took my arm and said, "Brother Hartman, the Lord surely sent that child to you." And I said, "Yes, ma'am, he surely did." Carla was 11 feet away with a pie server in her hand, and she heard every word of it, and she never turned around. Then I remembered the yard. It was a night last June, hot. I had come out on the back steps around 10 o'clock because I could not settle, and she was standing off by the crepe myrtles with the phone at her ear and her back to the house. She did not know I was there. I only got a piece of it. What I heard her say was, "No, the old man is the burden, not the boy." And I stood there on my own steps, and I thought, well, now that is not a kind thing to say. And I thought, she is tired. She works hard. Everybody says a hard thing on the telephone at 10 o'clock at night. And then I went in the house and I went to bed. And I never thought about it one more time. Until I was sitting in that grove, 16 months later. That is what I want somebody to hear out of all this. It was not that I could not see. Things came right up in front of my face.
I would get a hold of one, and it would go loose in my hand like a fish, and something underneath would say, "Reuben, you are tired, you are old. That woman has done nothing but take care of you." And I would set it down.
Every single time. The sun had come up over the trees while we talked, and there was warmth on the side of my face now, and the shadows were pulling back into the rows. Somewhere, off toward the county road, a dog was going at something. "Son," I said. Why could I not hold on to any of it? And Demetrius reached into the pocket of the laptop case and took out a small orange bottle and set it on my father's bench between us. "Because of this," he said. I picked it up. It was mine. It had been sitting in my medicine cabinet on the second shelf next to the blue label bottle I have taken for my blood pressure since 2015. I have reached past it and reached for it something like 2,000 mornings, and I could not tell you one single thing about it. The label was right. The pharmacy in Cleveland was right. The little logo in the corner, the refill line, the dosage, printed out my own name across the top, Reuben J. Hartman, in that plain typeface they all use. But the weight was wrong. I have handled 10,000 things in my life by weight. You learn a bin is full before you look in it. You learn a bearing is going before it sounds like anything. That bottle came up off the bench too light in my hand, and something in my wrist knew it before the rest of me did. I shook it. That was the part. The sound those tablets made against the plastic was not the sound I had been hearing every morning for years. It was higher, and it was faster, and it was drier, like the difference between shot and sand. I shook it again. I sat there in my own grove and shook a pill bottle twice like a fool, and my son sat and let me do it. "Those are not your blood pressure pills," he said. "What are they?" "I had 2 of them run independently last spring," he said. "Lab in Memphis. A benzodiazepine compound, low concentration, consistent, taken every day over years." I did not say anything. "It does not take much," Demetrius said. "That is the whole thing about it, Daddy. A big dose knocks a man down and somebody notices. A small one every morning for 5 years just makes you slow. It makes you lose the end of your own sentences. It makes you walk into a room and stand there." He stopped. "And it makes you stop trusting the part of you that says, something is wrong here." I looked out at the rows. Here is what came to me first, and I am not proud of it, but it came first, and I have promised to tell this straight. Relief. Sitting on my father's bench with that bottle in my hand, what went through me first was not anger at anybody. It was a thing like a man setting down a sack he has been carrying so long he forgot he picked it up. Because for 5 years, I had been afraid. Not out loud. I never said one word of it to my son, to my pastor, to anybody. But every time I stood in the barn, not knowing what I came in there for, there was a voice in me that said, "This is how it starts. This is how it went, with your daddy at the end. And you are next." My father went out over about 4 years. He was a proud man, and it took him by inches. First, it was the checkbook. Then it was the truck keys, and I was the one who took them, and he did not speak to me for 11 days. At the end, he did not always know which room of his own house he was standing in, and he would get this look on him when you could tell he had lost the thread, a kind of quick shame, and he would go outside so nobody would see it. I was 29 years old watching that. I promised myself I would never put my children through it. I was not going the way my father went. I was being poisoned by somebody who brought it to me in a little plastic tray and set it down with 2 fingers. And then the second thing came, and the second thing was worse. 3 Sundays ago, I stood in the yard of my church with a paper plate in my hand and told my pastor that woman counted out my pills every week of her life. I said it proud. I put my chest out about it. Half the men I have known since I was a boy were standing right there in that yard and heard me say it. I want to be careful here, because there is a way to tell this that makes me pitiful, and I am not asking anybody for that.
But you have to understand what it is to be 69 years old and find out that the thing you were bragging on in the churchyard was the thing.
The bottle was still in my hand. I set it down on the bench and I took my hand back off it. Down the row, a squirrel came off the trunk of a tree and went across the ground in that stop-and-go way they have. Stopped, sat up with something in its paws, and went on. 2 rows over, the leaves were coming down slow, 1 and then 2, turning over. There was a smell of dust and dry holes, and the ground was warming up and giving off that flat mineral smell it gives off in October. Way off out past the county road, I could hear a school bus stop and stop again. I've sat on that bench my whole life. My father sat on it before me. I put my hand flat on the plank beside the bottle and left it there. Then something else came to me, and it was such a small thing that I almost did not say it out loud. "Son," I said, "the coffee this morning." He looked at me. "She grinds the coffee," I said. "She has always ground the coffee. She keeps it in that gray canister on the shelf, and she sets the pot up the night before, every night, for 6 years. This morning, she was packing. I got a bag out of the freezer, and I made it myself." Demetrius did not say anything for a second. Then he said, "That is the first cup of coffee you have made in this house since 2018. And that is why it tasted right," I said. "Yes, sir." I thought about how many mornings I had stood at that counter and thought something was a little off, and never once been able to say what. Not sick, not bad, just never quite the thing itself. 6 years of coffee. I am not going to try to describe what that did to me. Some things you say plain, and let a man carry them himself. Daddy, Demetrius said. "Look at me." I looked at him. "You are not losing your mind," he said. "You never were. Everything that has been happening to you since 2019 was done to you on purpose by a person for a reason." He said it slow, and he did not take his eyes off me. "There is not one thing wrong with you." The wind came down the row and went on. "All right," I said. And then he closed his hand around the edge of the laptop and said, "But the pills were only how they kept you quiet while they worked. They are not what this is about." "Then what is it about?" He opened the laptop, and this time he did not turn it toward me. He reached into the case and brought out a brown envelope, thick, worn, soft along the fold from being handled. "It is about what you signed," he said. He did not hand me the envelope. He opened the flap and began laying the papers out along the plank of the bench, one at a time, smoothing each one flat with the back of his hand before he went to the next. I watched him do it, and I did not say a word. There were 11 of them. Some were a single page. 2 ran to 4 pages, stapled. He put them down in an order, and I understood, watching him, that the order was not accidental. He had them arranged the way a man arranges an argument he intends to win, each one setting up the next, each one making the one after it harder to wave off. He had not thrown that envelope together the week before. He had built it over years, the way you build a thing you mean to hold up under weight. At the bottom right corner of every single page was a signature. Mine. Now I want to tell you something about a man and his own name. I'm 69 years old. I've run this place since 1983. Between the crop loans and the chemical logs and the delivery tickets and the plat maps and the insurance and 40 years of payroll, I have signed my name more times than any man could count. I know my signature the way I know my own hands. I know that the R comes out wide and open when I am in a good mood and closes up tight when I am tired. I know the H drops below the line on the days my wrist has been on a wrench since daylight. I know there is a hitch in the middle of the last name from a break I took in 1991 that never did set right, and that on a cold morning that hitch shows up plain. Every signature on those 11 pages was mine. The hitch was there, the tired R was there on some of them, and the open one on others. There was not one thing about a single one of them that a man with a magnifying glass would have called wrong, because there was nothing wrong with them. I do not remember signing any of them. I sat with that a minute before I let myself go on to the next thought. Not because I doubted what I was looking at, because the whole size of it needed a second to come down. I had not been robbed in the night. Nobody had jimmied a window. I had been walked carefully and repeatedly through the taking apart of my own place, while I believed I was finishing my evening tea. The first three were financial authorizations, limited power of attorney over particular accounts, operating account, the equipment note, the account we settled the crew out of. The kind of paper that, in the right hands, lets somebody move money, approve a transfer, redirect a payment, without coming to me for a signature on every last thing.
There is nothing crooked about a document like that. Half the men I know have signed one. What makes it crooked is the disclosure and the record of intent, and whether the man signing it knew what he was doing.
The dates ran March through August of 2019. I went back through that spring in my mind and tried to find those evenings. Tried to find one specific night, the table, the lamp, a paper in front of me, my own hand, deciding. What I found instead was the back sitting room. That is where I sat after supper for about 4 years. The low lamp on the side table by my chair, the television going with the sound down because I did not much care what was on it. I only wanted the company. And Carla coming in around 8 o'clock with a cup of that herbal tea she started making me, chamomile and something else in it, in the mug with the county fair on the side. And about 40 minutes after that, the room would start to go soft around the edges. There is one evening I can almost get hold of. Late in the spring, warm enough that the window was up, she came in with the tea and she stood there a second and said, "Daddy Reuben, I need you to put your name on something for the insurance man before I forget it again." And I remember thinking that I ought to get my glasses. I do not remember getting up to get them. I have to say the next part carefully. I was grateful for it. That is the truth. I had gone 3 years since Amora without sleeping right. I would lie up there at 2 in the morning doing arithmetic on the crop. And then here came this tea in the evening, and here came sleep, real sleep, the kind you go down into. And I thought, well, thank the Lord I have finally gotten past something. I told that girl so. I said, whatever is in that tea, do not run out of it. Demetrius let me sit with the first 3 as long as I wanted. He did not rush me along. When I set the third one down, he reached over and put one finger next to the fourth without touching the paper. "This one is different," he said. I picked it up. It was a conveyance. 4 pages. It transferred a 15% undivided interest in the West Quarter, the 100 acres that runs from the turn row down to the drainage ditch, to a limited liability company registered up in Delaware. I read it twice. I read every line of it twice, the way I have read everything my whole life. And I want you to know that not one word of it was hard to understand. It was plain paper. It said what it did. "Who is the company?" I said. 2 members listed, Demetrius said. "One is a name that does not appear anywhere else in the world as far as I can find. The other is a registered agent out of Tunica." He looked at me. "That agent has stood for 4 entities in 19 years. Cade Franklin has controlled every one of them." I looked down at my own name on the end of that 4th page. The R was tight. The hitch was there. "I signed this," I said. "Yes, sir." "When?" He did not have to look it up. A Tuesday evening, June of 2019. I turned the page over and looked at the back of it, which was blank, and turned it back. "That was the week," I said. He waited. "That was the week I told you I had slept 11 hours and got up more tired than I laid down. You remember that?" I said, "Something is wrong with me, son. I am sleeping like the dead, and it is not doing me any good." I remembered Demetrius said. 15% of the West Quarter. Now understand what that ground is. The West Quarter is where the old trees stand, the ones my grandfather put in the year after he bought the place, and at the north end of it, up under the 2 biggest ones, there is a square of ground about 40 feet on a side with a low iron fence around it that my father set himself. My grandfather is in there. My mother and father are in there. My wife is in there. And my daughter is in there. I had signed away a percentage of the ground my people are buried in, and gone up to bed and slept 11 hours. "Yes, sir," he said. "And that is the first one." He let me work through the rest of them at my own speed. The 5th one took 30% of the north 80. That is the newer ground, the trees my father put in when I was in high school, and it is the best drained land on the place. The sixth was a harvest rights agreement, 20 years of the crop off the East Rose to an operating company, with the trees staying in my name. That is a thing a man might sign if he was tired and wanted somebody else to run the pickers. 20 years. I would be 89. The seventh was a drainage easement across the south end. I read that one 3 times. There is not a dollar figure anywhere on it. There is not a word in it that would make a stranger sit up. But I have farmed Delta Bottom my whole life, and I will tell you what a drainage easement is. It is the water. Whoever holds the ditch on the south end decides what stands in the north end in a wet April. That piece of paper does not take 1 acre away from anybody. It just puts a hand on the throat of the whole place. The eighth was a management agreement naming that Delaware company as operator of record. The ninth was an amendment to the first conveyance, 2 paragraphs. It gave any member holding an undivided interest the right to petition for partition and sale of the whole property. I set that one down and looked at my son. That is the Bravo thing, I said. Yes, sir, Demetrius said. That is the Bravo thing. The 10th was an option. It gave that same company the right at any time in the next 4 years to buy my remaining interest in all 400 acres at a price fixed in an attached schedule. I turned to the schedule. I have to tell you that I laughed. Not much of one, just air coming out of me sideways, the way it does when a thing is so far past what you were braced for that your body does not know what else to do with it. The figure on that schedule was under half of what Cade Franklin had offered me across the tailgate of my truck in 2014. 10 years back, when he was still asking. I reached into my shirt pocket and got out the pencil I keep in there, and I turned one of the pages over to the blank side to run the numbers, because that is what I do. I have run numbers on the backs of things my whole life. Feed tickets, church bulletins, the back of my hand. I got the 400 down, and then my hand would not do it. I want to be plain about this, and then I want to move on from it. The pencil came down on the paper, and the point of it went off sideways, and I set it back down, and it went off again. And the numbers I was making were not numbers a man could read. I have had unsteady hands before, out in the cold after a long day on the wrench. This was not that. This was my hand deciding on its own that it was not going to write the total. Demetrius did not say anything, and he did not look away, and he did not reach over. He sat there and let me have it. I put the pencil back in my pocket, and what came into my mind right then, sitting out in the middle of my East Rose with my son and a bench full of paper, was that glass jar sitting up on the mantel in my front room about a quarter mile behind us. Red dirt in it, gone almost black. My grandfather dug that dirt the day he signed and handed it to my father, and my father handed it to me. And the whole of what was said over it was 4 words. Not 1 acre. Ever. I did the arithmetic anyway. I did it in my head, which I had not been able to do reliably in 5 years. And it came out clean. And I have never been so sorry about being right about a number in my life. Between the 2 conveyances, they had taken title to about 79 acres. But that is not the number that matters, and both of us knew it. With the amendment, they could force the sale of everything. With the easement, they could ruin what they did not own until somebody had to sell it. With the option, they had already set the price. And there were 9 men on my payroll that season. 2 of them had been with me better than 20 years. Junior Barnes came to me at 17 years old, and he is 51 now, and he has never worked anywhere else in his life. I sat there on that bench and thought about standing in the shop door and telling those men that the place had been sold out from under all of us while I sat in a chair after supper drinking tea. They did not have 79 acres. They had the place. They had all of it. They had had it since August of 2019, and nobody had told me. Now, I have thought a long time about what happened in me next, because I do not believe I decided it. I believe it was already in me, and it just came up. I have watched men get taken. There was a man named Otis Duke, about 11 miles from my gate, who lost 200 acres in 1994 over a note his brother signed. And I watched what it did to him afterward. And it was not the land that did it. He sat down. That is the only way I know how to say it. He was 53 years old, strong as a mule, and he came in off that ground one evening and sat down in a chair on his porch, and he was still sitting in it 11 years later when they buried him. He never worked another day. Folks said he took it hard. That is not what happened to him. What happened to him is that a man can only be told so many times that he could not hold on to what was his before he starts to believe it is because he was not the man to hold it. I looked at the mess of paper on my father's bench, and I felt that chair out there waiting for me. And what I said was, "Keep going." Demetrius looked up. "There is one more," I said. "You laid 11 out, and I have been through 10. Keep going." He did not move for a second. Then he nodded one time, and I saw something come into his face and go out of it again, too fast for me to name. That 11th document was lying face down at the end of the row. It had been lying there, face down, the whole time we had been out there, and I had not asked about it. And now I understood that he had put it in that position on purpose. The way you set the last thing. He put 2 fingers on the corner of it. "This one does not take any land," he said. "Then what does it take?" And my son turned it over. It was an insurance application, 4 pages. Standard form, the kind with the boxes and the small print down the left margin, issued by a company out of Little Rock called Cypress Ridge Life and Indemnity. I had never heard the name in my life. Applicant Reuben J. Hartman. Date of birth, correct. Address, correct. Occupation, agricultural producer. The coverage amount sat in a little summary box on the first page, printed in that flat, gray typeface those forms use. The same typeface, whether the paper is telling you about a fender or telling you about the end of a man's life. $3 million. Beneficiary, Carla Cabrera Hartman. Date of signature, October the 11th, 2021. I looked at that beneficiary line for a while. Then I said, "She is not my wife, and she is not my child. How does a woman take out $3 million on her husband's father?" "Insurable interest," Demetrius said. He said it the way you say a term you have had to learn. She had to show she stood to lose something if you died. 2 things did that. One is that she was your live-in caregiver, and there is a whole page in there where a doctor certifies it. Pratt, he said. And the other one is document number 8. I looked back down the bench at that management agreement lying there, the driest piece of paper in the whole row. The one I had read once and set aside as bookkeeping. That paper made her an officer of the operating entity, Demetrius said. That gave her a business interest in the continued operation of this farm. That is what the underwriter looked at. I sat there and I understood for the first time that I had not been looking at 11 separate things. I had been looking at a machine, every piece cut to fit the piece next to it. Document 7 makes the water. Document 8 makes her an officer. Document 8 makes document 11 legal. Document 9 makes the sale possible. Document 10 sets the price. And every last one of them was fitted together across 2.5 years by somebody sitting at a table with all the time in the world, in the same house where I was sleeping. October of 2021, I said. Do you remember that week? I did, not the signing. I have never gotten the signing back, and I do not expect to now. But I remember the week, the way you sometimes remember the frame around a thing when the middle of it is gone. I had a stomach bug, 3 days of it. Could not keep anything down, ran a low fever, lost about 6 pounds. Carla brought broth up on a tray twice a day. She kept a glass of ice water on the nightstand, and she changed it out so it never went warm. By Saturday, I was well enough to sit out on the porch an hour, and I remember thinking, that girl never once complained. Who is Cypress Ridge, I said. They have been writing policies 9 years, Demetrius said. Real license, real filings, real claims paid. But the original capital came in through a chain of 4 holding entities, And the last one in that chain is a brokerage account. He paused. Franklin did not just find a company to write this policy, Daddy. He built the company that wrote it. $3 million. I set that page down flat on the plank with the others, and I put my hands on my knees, and I looked out at the trees. Here is the thing about me. I have sat across a table from men who were trying to take something from me, and I learned early that the second your hands start moving, you have lost the room. Steady is not a feeling, it is a habit. I have had it so long that it is not something I do anymore. It is something I am. I looked down at my hands on my knees, and they were not moving at all. Down the row, 2 rows over, one of the trees let go of a limb, load all at once, the way they do, and there was that quick rattling patter of them coming down through the branches and hitting the ground. A crow said something off toward the ditch, and another one answered it further out. The sun was full up over the tree line now, and there was a warm bar of it lying across the back of my neck. I could smell the paper. Old paper has a smell, dry and a little sweet, and 11 sheets of it were lying on my father's bench, giving it off in the sun. I sat there a minute. Then I turned to my son. "All right," I said, "what do we do?" And that was the turn. I want to mark it because it was the whole thing. Up until that minute, I had been a man being told what had happened to him. I had been sitting there taking delivery of my own life. From that minute on, I was in it. I did not feel brave about it, and I was not calm, but I had quit asking what had been done and started asking what we were going to do. And there is a great deal of difference between those 2 men. Demetrius did not answer right off. He looked at me a second, and then he asked me a question instead. "Daddy," he said, "this morning, did you take one?" The way he said it, level and slow, put a cold place right in the middle of me. I went back through the morning with more care than I have ever given to 5 minutes in my life. The kitchen, the light on the counter, Carla setting the Thursday tray down with 2 fingers, me standing there with the coffee, and then the drawer. Not the tray. The tray was still sitting on the counter where she left it, and I had walked off and left it the way a man does. But there is a bottle in my nightstand drawer that I have kept up there for 3 or 4 years, so I do not have to come downstairs in the morning before I have my sense about me. I have gone up to get my reading glasses off the dresser. I had opened that drawer out of pure habit and shaken one out and swallowed it dry. "One," I said, "out of the bottle in the nightstand." Something went out of my son's shoulders that I had not known was in them. "That is the bottle I put in there last night," he said. I did not say anything. "I went in your room at 1 o'clock this morning, and I took the one that was in there, and I put a clean one in its place." He was talking faster now than he had all morning. "1 dose out of that bottle will not do a thing to you. Nothing." "And the one you took out." Demetrius looked at me. "That one," he said, "is the reason we are not going back in that house today." "Son," I said, "when did you start getting better?" He did not answer that one fast either. He closed the laptop halfway and set it over on the far end of the bench on top of the papers to keep the wind off them. Then he sat with his forearms on his knees and looked out down the row for a while. "January of 2020, he said. "I woke up one morning and there was something in my left foot. Not movement, just something." He turned his hand over and looked at the palm of it. "The kind of thing you can talk yourself out of by breakfast." "And you did not tell me." "No, sir." "Why?" "Because I did not know what it was, yet," he said. "And because by then I had already started to understand that something in this house was not right. And I did not know how big it was, and I was not going to lay a card face up on the table until I knew who was sitting at it." "You were protecting yourself," I said. He looked at me then. "I was protecting both of us," he said. "If Carla had known I was coming back, she would have changed whatever she was doing, or moved it up, and I would have lost the only thing I had, which was that she was not looking at me." I sat with that. As a matter of strategy, it was sound. I could not fault one piece of it. As a matter of a father sitting on a bench listening to his son describe deciding that alone at night in a bed he could not get out of, it was going to take me considerably longer. Then he told me about the nights after the house went down. After her light went off and the boards quit ticking and the well pump cut out, and the whole place got to that particular quiet an old house gets to around 1 in the morning. He would work his way off the side of the bed and lower himself down onto the floor of that room. Those are the original pine boards up there, my grandfather's boards. They are cold 9 months of the year, and they are cold in a way that gets into you. He did it in the dark, all of it. No lamp, no phone, nothing that would throw a line of light under the door or put a shadow in the hall. He said he learned the room by feel until he could have moved anywhere in it blindfolded, which he essentially was. What he was doing at first was not exercise, it was hunting. He was lying on that floor in the dark, trying to find the road between wanting his leg to move and his leg moving. He said there were nights when nothing came at all, and he would lie there for 2 hours, and then get himself back up into the bed, and that would be the whole night. It hurt. He did not make much of that part, which is how I knew. It is not the kind of hurt that hollers, he said. It gets down in the joints and sets up there and stays. He used the well pump to keep time. It kicks on twice a night out at that house, and he learned about how long he had between them, and that was his clock. He worked in sets, and he counted them out in his head because you could not have a watch face lit up in that room. Ankle first, then the hip, then the long, slow business of getting a knee to answer. When he was through, he would take his undershirt off and wipe the floor down where he had been lying, because a man sweats on old pine, and old pine holds a mark. And Carla came in that room twice a week, and in the morning, my son would let me come up those stairs and get my arms under him and carry him down to his chair. I want to sit in that a second because I did not get to when he told me. For 4 years, I lifted a man who could hold his own weight. He let me do it. He had to. And every one of those mornings, that man's body already knew things that his face was not allowed to show. And he rode down 14 steps in my arms with all of it locked up inside him. And then he said good morning and ate his breakfast across the table from the woman who put him there. There was a morning that spring, and I remember it because I thought I was being funny when I got him halfway down and stopped on the landing to catch my wind. And I said, "Boy, you are getting heavy on me. What is that girl feeding you?" And he laughed. He laughed at his old daddy on the stairs. 4 years I have had to sit with what it cost him to make that sound. Carla was not watching me for recovery, he said. Pratt had her looking for stability. That is a different thing. As long as I stayed exactly where I was, there was no reason for anybody to look any closer at me. So you gave her stability. Every day, he said. For 4 years. Then he told me about the summer, August of 2020. He said it was one of those nights where the heat never turned loose of the house, where the air upstairs just sits on you, and the sheets are damp before you ever lie down. He had been working the floor about 7 months by then. He got his palms flat under his shoulders, and he pushed himself up, and he stood. He said he was shaking from his heels to his jaw, and that his whole body was telling him something he did not have any words for, even now. He counted. He got to 3. Then his knees went out from under him, and he came back down onto those boards. He said he put his forehead on the floor and stayed like that a good while. He said he did not make a sound. There was a long piece of quiet on that bench after he said it. A hackberry leaf came skating down the row on its edge and got caught up under the seat. Somewhere back toward the shop, the compressor kicked on and ran and shut off. I looked at my son's hands, which were folded, and at the side of his face, which was turned away from me toward the trees. And I did not say one word to him. There was not a word that belonged in there. I have replayed that quiet more times than I have replayed the loud parts of that day. After a bit, he sat back up, and then he stopped. Just for a beat, but I heard it. My son does not stop in the middle of a sentence. He has laid out 4 years of the worst thing that ever happened to this family in a voice you could set a level on. And right there, one time, the machinery caught. He took a breath through his nose and went on. And then he said, "The night I stood up, that same night." He turned and looked straight at me. I heard her voice downstairs. He got himself off that floor and out into the hall on his forearms. He said it took him a long while and that he had to stop twice.
The upstairs hall at that house runs down to an open landing with a rail along it, and if you lie flat up against the bottom of that rail in the dark, you can hear the front room and the kitchen almost like you were standing in them. And nobody down there can see one thing. He stayed up there 11 minutes. She was in the kitchen doorway with the phone. He could see the light off the screen on the wall and nothing else. And what my son heard lying on his belly on my grandfather's floorboards at 2 o'clock in the morning was a woman he had been married to for less than a year giving somebody a report. The old man is easier every month, she said. Not cruel. That is the part I once understood. Demetrius said there was nothing in her voice at all. It was the voice you use when you call in a fuel order. She said he signs what I put in front of him now, and he does not ask twice. She said the son is no trouble, he cannot go anywhere. Then there was a stretch where she was listening. A man's voice on the other end, too low to make out any words, but Demetrius said you could hear the shape of it. Measured, unhurried. A man used to being listened to. And then she said, "All right." Then we stay the course. The kitchen light went off. He heard her come up the back stairs and go into her room and shut the door. He lay there on that landing until he was sure, and then he pulled himself back down the hall and up into his bed. And he did not sleep at all. He said he spent that night deciding what to do.
The obvious thing is you call the law. He understood that, and he understood inside of about an hour why he was not going to.
Cade Franklin has been buying and suing in these counties for 20 years. He has sat on a hospital board. He put money in a courthouse annex. He has had lunch with people whose names are on buildings. I am not saying one single man in this county is crooked, and I would not say it because I do not know it. What I am saying is what my son said to me on that bench, which is that you cannot put a thing like this into a room where the man you are reporting knows 4 people who walk through it and expect it to stay in that room for even a day. And the minute it did not stay in that room, Demetrius said she would be gone and the paper would be gone, and you and I would be 2 men with a story. So he did not make a call. He made a plan. Inside of about 10 days, he had 2 recorders. Small ones, the kind that will sit inside something else and run a long time. He put one in the case of the clock that hangs in the upstairs hall, which has been on that wall since before he was born, and which nobody has taken down in 30 years. The other one went inside a book on the shelf by his door that he cut out the middle of with a utility knife. The laptop lived in the cavity underneath his bedside cabinet up under it, where you would have to be lying on the floor to see the panel at all, and his chair sat parked in its regular place at the side of the bed and covered the whole lower half of it. He bought 2 prepaid phones with cash, one in Clarksdale, one in Greenville, 6 weeks apart. One of them was for talking. The other one never talked to anybody. It only pushed files up to a server whose address does not exist on any device inside that house. 3.5 years, he said. I have been recording since September of 2020. He told me all of that sitting up straight on my father's bench from a wheelchair he had not needed since before the pandemic was over. And then he told me the other thing. In the spring of 2021, once he had a good idea what was in my bottle, he started taking some of it out. Not all of it. He was firm about that, and it took me a minute to understand why. Carla checked the bottles. Not every week, but often enough, and she counted against what she expected to be gone. If the count came out wrong, she would have known that day. So he worked in pieces. He would pull out 4 or 5 of the bad ones and put back 4 or 5 of the right ones, which he bought in ordinary pharmacies in Jackson and Cleveland with cash on the days I had appointments, and he was wheeled in and left sitting in a hallway for 10 minutes at a time. 10 minutes at a time. That is what he had. I could not get it all out of you, he said, but I could bring the load down. And he stopped and looked at the ground for a second and said, "That is why you can still do arithmetic in your head, Daddy. That is why it did not go any further than it went." I did not say anything for a while. I was thinking about my son in a hallway at a clinic in Jackson, with his hands in his lap and his face arranged, counting the seconds until somebody came back for him. I was thinking about what it means to be the man who decides every few weeks exactly how much poison his own father is going to get. Not none. He could not do none. None would have been noticed, and none would have gotten us both killed. So he sat up there in the dark, and he picked a number, over and over, for 3 years. And he never once got to tell anybody he was doing it. I have asked myself since whether I would have had the nerve. I do not know. I am 69 years old, and I have run this place through 2 droughts, a flood that put water in the shop, a bank that called a note on me in 1988, and 3 funerals. And I still do not know that I would have had it. Son, I said. Sir, I could not get the rest of the sentence up. So I put my hand on the back of his neck the way I used to when he was a boy, and had done something that needed more than words. And I left it there a second, and I took it back. He let out a breath. Then he said, "And that brings us to that winter." What about that winter? That winter, he said they got tired of waiting on the paper. He looked at me. That is the winter they let you fall. January of 2022. I do not have much of that morning. What I have is the cold and the dark, and the feel of my hand going out for the rail at the back steps and finding nothing where the rail was supposed to be. There is a half second in there where I knew. Then the ceiling of the emergency room in Cleveland, and a young man asking me to follow his finger with my eyes. 2 cracked ribs and a concussion. 3 days admitted. I have gone back over that morning so many times since. The floodlight over those back steps had been out since before Thanksgiving. I asked about it twice. The first time she said she would call somebody, and the second time she said the fixture was ordered. And there was ice on the second step on a morning it had not rained in 9 days. Carla sat by that hospital bed every one of those 3 days. She brought a pillow from home because the hospital ones were flat. Everybody on that floor knew her name by the second afternoon. Demetrius opened a file on the laptop and turned the screen so I could see the length of it. 41 seconds. "This was the night they brought you in," he said, off the clock in the upstairs hall. She was down in the kitchen. He pressed it. Her voice came out of that little speaker into the middle of my grandfather's pecan grove. He fell. A pause, maybe 2 seconds. "It is done. Pratt will take it from here." That was all. 41 seconds of file, and about 9 of it was her talking. The rest was the icebox running and a car going by out on the road. Same voice. That is the thing. Same voice she used to tell me my 9 o'clock was the small white one. Same voice she used at that hospital to ask the nurse if I could have a second blanket. The recording ended, and the grove was very quiet. "Who is Pratt to them?" I said. Demetrius took a breath before he answered. Not a stalling breath. The breath a man takes when he has been carrying a specific thing a long time and is setting it down carefully so it does not break something on the way. "His name is Graham Pratt," he said. "Family practice in this county, 22 years. Hospital privileges. No complaints on file, no board action. Nothing that would make anybody look twice at him." He paused. "Franklin got to him sometime before you fell." Before Demetrius said, "We have gotten messages that put the arrangement in place weeks ahead of that morning." I turned that word over. Before means the fall was not a piece of luck that somebody hurried to take advantage of. Before means the light over those steps and the water on that step and the whole cold dark of that morning were not carelessness at all. They were groundwork. Somebody laid it and then waited on the weather. "What was the arrangement?" I said, although by then I had a fair idea. "When you were admitted, Pratt came by and recommended a cognitive evaluation," Demetrius said. "They put it to you as standard. Head injury at your age, they always screen. Somebody brought a clipboard around the second morning. I remembered it. Or I remembered the shape of it. A young woman with a clipboard and a pleasant, unhurried voice saying it was routine following any impact to the head. Me signing at the bottom with the overhead lights giving me a headache and my glasses in a drawer somewhere at home. Second day, 2 cracked ribs and a concussion and 5 years of that fog on top of it. It seemed like paperwork. That is the whole of what I thought about it. It seemed like paperwork. The evaluation was written to come out a certain way before anybody ever gave it to you, Demetrius said. He opened a second file. This one was shorter.
A hallway somewhere, the sound of a floor buffer running way off, two people talking in that low, careful register people use when they know they are standing in a public place. Carla first. Calm. The logistics voice. The evaluation needs to show early decline. Enough for a conservatorship. Then a man. Lower clip the way a man talks when he is used to dictating notes. What is the timeline? And her again. When he is discharged. Inside the month. 39 seconds. It ended. Demetrius let it sit before he said anything else. In Mississippi, that goes to Chancery Court, he said. Once you have got a licensed physician's finding of impairment on the record, the petition is mostly a formality. 60 to 90 days from filing if nobody contests it. And she was already your caregiver of record and an officer of the operating entity. And nobody would have contested it, I said. You would have been the one to contest it, Demetrius said. And the paper would have already said you were not competent to. What I did then was ask him about the procedure. I asked who signs the order. I asked whether the crew would have kept getting paid out of the operating account and who would have had authority over the crop insurance. I asked 4 or 5 questions about mechanics, one after another, in a level voice, and Demetrius answered every one of them. And neither one of us said the word that was actually sitting on that bench with us. I have been in rooms with men my whole life. I know what a man is doing when he asks about procedure. I sat on my father's bench and looked out at 400 acres of trees. I built this place up from what my father left me. I have stood in a bank in Cleveland in 1988 and told a man in a necktie that he was not calling my note that year. And I was right, and he did not. I have sat across tables from men who wanted what I had, and I never once got up from one of those tables with less than I sat down with. And in the space of one hospital stay, one light bulb, and one wet step on a freezing morning, I came within one signature of being declared a man who could not be trusted to decide anything about his own life. It did not go through, I said. No, sir. Why not? Because I took the form out of your discharge packet, Demetrius said. I looked at shift change, he said. Your room, 2nd floor. The packet was in the sleeve on the door. I had a nurse push me down there and leave me sitting while she went to find somebody. He shrugged one shoulder. Pratt logged the evaluation as incomplete. He wrote down, patient fatigue. You were in a chair, I said. Yes, sir. You were in a chair in a hospital hallway, and you took a legal document out of a door. Yes, sir. I want you to know that Carla was not happy about that, he said. I have got that conversation too, if you ever want. Not today, I said. No, sir. The wind moved through the tops of the trees, and the light kept coming up. Son, I said, how much of this have you been carrying by yourself? And Demetrius shook his head slowly. Not all of it, he said. Not for the last 2 years. His name is Ibrahim Anthony Demetrius, said. I knew the name before he finished saying it. Ibrahim came home with my son one Thanksgiving when they were both 19 years old and ate 2 plates at my table and called my wife ma'am about 40 times. Freshman hall at Mississippi Valley State. They roomed across from each other and stayed friends the way young men do when the friendship gets made early enough. He went federal, Demetrius said. Bureau. He works financial crimes out of the Jackson office. Multi-state fraud insurance schemes and a good deal of air property work. Air property, I said. Yes, sir, he said. That is most of what he does now. There is more of it in this state than anywhere in the country. 2 years ago, last spring, Demetrius opened an email account on a prepaid device he had bought in Greenville. He said the first message he sent had no names in it, no town, no county, nothing that could be walked back to a farm or a family. What it had was a structure, a long-running scheme to take agricultural land through fraudulent instruments, professional organization, documented evidence of at least one prior death connected to it, an active operation currently in its final stage. Ibrahim called the prepaid number inside of 48 hours. We have been building it in parallel ever since, Demetrius said. He came at it from the outside. Entity filings, the money going into Cypress Ridge, the whole chain, back through those holding companies, the Bravo file out of Bolivar County, and every one of those 14 properties. He set his hand flat on the laptop. I built it from the inside. Every recording, every document, every time and date stamp. His file and mine cross-reference clean all the way through. There are no gaps between them. And what does he have now? A warrant, Demetrius said, signed by a federal judge 14 days ago. I did not say anything. Conspiracy to commit wire and mail fraud, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, tampering with a pharmaceutical compound, and enough on the Bravo matter to have it reopened. He looked at me. It covers Franklin. It covers Carla. It covers Pratt. 14 days, I said. It has been sitting there 14 days waiting on one thing. Waiting on what? On me putting the whole package in his hands with you sitting next to me knowing what is in it, Demetrius said. I was not going to have this done to you twice. He did not raise his voice at all. Whatever else happened out here today, you were going to hear it from me first, out loud, in your own grove. I looked away from him down the row for a minute. Then I said, Son, I need to tell you something I did. He waited. Spring of 2022. There was a stretch in there, 4 days maybe, where the fog came up off me. I did not know why at the time. I suspect now it lined up with a run where he had gotten more of the bad ones out than usual, though we have never sat down and matched it against his records. Whatever it was, I had 4 days where I was myself. And what I did with them was this. On the second afternoon, I went out to the shop and shut the door, and I sat down at that steel desk, and I wrote out a will in my own hand. Not a revision of the one my lawyer has got, a separate one, longhand, every word of it, laying out this land and these accounts and exactly what was to happen to all of it. In Mississippi, a will in a man's own handwriting will stand up if he signs it and dates it. I knew that. My father knew it before me. I signed it and dated it and folded it and put it in an envelope. Then I put it in the floor safe. There's a safe set into the concrete under the workbench in that shop. I had it put in when we poured that floor in 2009. It has never been on an insurance inventory. It is under a piece of rubber mat and a scrap of plywood and a parts bin that weighs about 90 pounds. Carla did not know it existed, and she certainly did not have the combination. And then, because some part of me was already afraid, I did one more thing. When Demetrius was 10 years old, him and me spent a whole summer mapping this grove. Every tree on the place. We walked it row by row with a composition notebook, and he wrote the numbers because his handwriting was better than mine even then. Row 9, tree 40. Row 12, tree 6. That notebook has sat on the shelf in that shop for 31 years. I took a pencil and I wrote 4 of those numbers on the inside of the back cover. They were the combination. To anybody else on this earth, they were 4 numbers in a boy's old notebook. I told myself I was being foolish. Then I put the notebook back and I turned off the light and I went in the house and made supper. I looked over at my son. I know about the safe, Demetrius said. I sat there. I found the notebook 2 years ago, he said. I told Carla I wanted to go out and sit in the shop a while, and she did not question it, because what was I going to do? He almost smiled, and it did not get all the way there. I knew what those numbers were before I had the cover all the way open. You have read it. I photographed every page of it. It went to Ibrahim in the second package. It is part of the federal record. And neither one of us said anything for a while after that. I want to try to put down what was in that quiet, and I do not think I can do it properly. 2 years ago, my son opened a safe in the floor of my shop and found out that his father had not laid down. And I was sitting there, finding out that my son had been standing up in the dark for 4 years. And the whole time, the both of us had been at the same kitchen table every morning of our lives, passing the salt. There was a mockingbird working somewhere over toward the ditch. A truck went by out on the county road, and the sound went off south and thinned out. My son sat with his hands on his knees, and I sat with mine flat on my father's bench, and the light came down through the leaves and moved on the ground between our boots. Then his phone went off against the plank. He had it up before the second buzz in one motion, the way a man does when he has been waiting on an alert long enough that his hand does it for him. He looked at the screen. His face did not change much. Something in it got sharp. He turned it around and showed me. It was the camera at the front gate. A black SUV was stopped on the far side of the cattle guard with the engine running. The time in the corner of the picture said 9:47. A man was getting out of the driver's side. I knew him from the way he stood. That is all it took. A picture the size of a playing card, shot down from a pole 40 feet off. And I knew the set of those shoulders and the particular way that man puts his feet on the ground. 10 years, and I knew him in about a second and a half. Cade Franklin stood on the far side of my cattle guard and looked at my house. He checked his watch. He looked at the house again. "He is not supposed to be here," Demetrius said. His voice had gone flat in a new way. Not scared. Cleared out the way a man's voice goes when everything not needed has been set aside. "Not until tonight," he said. "This is not the schedule Carla laid out. He decided this on his own." "Why would he move it up?" "Because he is careful," Demetrius said with his eyes on the screen. "He does not trust a timetable he did not build himself. He wants to walk it in daylight before anything happens on it. He wants to see the doors and the roads and where a vehicle can sit." "Does he know about the grove?" "He knows there are trees," Demetrius said. "He has been in that house, and he has been in that yard. And I do not believe he has ever been past the shop in his life. And there is no reason on this earth for a crippled man and a sick old man to be sitting on a bench in the middle of the east rows at 10 o'clock in the morning." On the little screen, the gate swung and the SUV came across the cattle guard and up the gravel. It parked where a friend would park, right up by the porch, not tucked around back. That told me something too. Demetrius touched the screen twice, and the picture split into 4. I have spent a good deal of time since trying to describe what it is to watch a man walk through your house on a telephone. Everything in there I know by heart. I know the third board inside the front door that pops. I know that the light in the front room at 10 in the morning comes across the floor and stops about a foot short of the piano nobody has played since my wife passed. And it was all right there in 4 gray squares with a stranger moving through it. And I could see every bit of it, and I could not do one single thing. He did not search. That is what got me. He did not open a drawer. He did not lift a cushion or look behind a door. He walked to the front room, went through the dining room, stood in the kitchen doorway about 4 seconds, and looked in without stepping in. He was going down a list. He was confirming that things were where he had been told they would be. "He has been in this house before," I said. "Yes, sir," Demetrius said without looking up. "More than once. Every time she drove you to Jackson." He went up the stairs. The upstairs camera caught him at the landing, one hand going along the wall a second, and then coming off. He walked right past my door. He did not so much as turn his head at my door. He stopped a second at the room that used to be Kennedy's, and then he went on to the end of the hall and put his hand on Demetrius's door and pushed it open. He stood in that doorway 20 seconds. I watched the number in the corner run. The room was exactly the way my son had left it that morning. Bed made, curtains open, and beside the desk, sitting where it has sat every morning for 7 years, was the chair. Empty, upright, turned just slightly toward the door, the way it always was. Cade Franklin looked at that chair for a long time. Whatever he ran through his mind while he was standing there, he came out the other side of it with an answer, because he turned around and went back down the hall at a different pace than he had come up it. "What did he just work out?" I said. Demetrius did not take his eyes off the screen. "He worked out that the chair is in the room, and I am not," he said. "A man who cannot walk does not leave his chair behind. So either somebody carried me out of this house and both vehicles are still in the shed, or I did not need it." "And which one is he going to land on?" "He does not have to land on one," Demetrius said. "He only has to decide we are on this property somewhere." That is worse. He came down the stairs, he crossed the front room, and then he stopped at the mantel. I have that piece of it in my head clearer than anything else that happened that whole day, and I have never been able to decide why. He stopped in front of my fireplace, with his back mostly to the camera, and he looked at what was up there. There is not much. A photograph of my mother and father on their porch steps, a brass shell casing my uncle brought back, and that jar. He picked it up. He held it up about chest high and turned it over once in his hand, the way a man does in a store with something he has not decided about.
Red dirt gone almost black, dug out of the north end of the West Quarter in 1951 by a man who had just bought 400 acres with cash he carried into that office in a paper sack. Cade Franklin turned my grandfather over in his hand and set him back down on the mantel. He did not set it back straight. He put it down at an angle, an inch or two off from where it had been for as long as I have been alive, and he walked away from it and never looked at it again. I did not say anything. My son did not say anything either, but he had gone still beside me in a way I could feel through the plank of that bench. I want to be honest about what went through me right then, because
It was not what a man might expect.
it was not rage. Rage came later, and it came plenty. What went through me sitting on that bench was my grandfather walking into a lawyer's office in 1951 in a county that had no use for him, with his money in a sack, and doing it anyway. And then me, 70 years down the road from that, in a recliner after supper with a cup of tea, signing whatever was put in front of me. I have had to make my peace with that. It has taken longer than the rest of it. On the screen, Cade Franklin walked back to the middle of my front room and took out his phone. Demetrius reached over and brought the audio up on the prepaid handset. The recorder in the hall clock was still running. It had been running for 3.5 years, and it was running right then. The call picked up on the first ring. "They are not here," Cade Franklin said. And then I heard her. 6 years that woman lived under my roof. 6 years of good morning and did you take your afternoon one and I put a plate up for you in the icebox. I thought I knew every way her voice went. I had never heard this one. "What do you mean they are not there?" The surface of it was the same. The words came out even and spaced, and she did not raise it one bit. But underneath the smooth part, something had shifted about a degree, the way an engine sounds when a bearing has just started to go, and you cannot yet point to what you are hearing. "Neither one of them," Cade said. "House is empty. Check the shop, check the equipment sheds. He does not go far in the mornings." "I have been through the whole downstairs and the upper hall," Cade said. "The old man's room has not been touched. The bed is made. The son's room, the chair is sitting right there by the desk. Both trucks are in the shed." There was a longer pause on her end. Then Carla said, "Find them. They cannot have gotten far." And then she said the rest of it. "The old man can barely walk." I have thought about that sentence more than I have thought about the $3 million. I am 69 years old. I get up at 5. That season, I had put in a new water line to the North 80 myself with a shovel and a helper, and I had walked every row of that grove twice in September looking at the set, and I was on the tractor the Saturday before that Thursday morning. But that was not what she was saying. She was not making a claim about my legs. She was reading off a number that had been arrived at over 5 years in a house where I ate every meal by people who had been steadily reducing me on paper and in bottles, until what was left of Reuben Hartman was one line in an inventory. An obstacle that could not move fast. My son turned his head and looked at me. I did not look back at him. I sat up a little straighter on my father's bench, and I put my eyes on the screen. And I did not say one word about it then, or for a long time after. Demetrius set the phone down on the plank between us. Then he pulled the laptop over onto his knees and said, "All right, send it," I said. He was already sending it. The transfer application came up and split the screen. On the left, 3 bars. He had them set to run red while they were moving. 3 separate server addresses, he told me, in 3 different jurisdictions, each one wanting its own key. Built that way so that if any one of them went down or got reached, the other 2 still landed. Everything was in it. 41 months of audio, photographs of all 11 documents, the lab work on the pills, the entity chain into Cypress Ridge, the Bravo file, Pratt's evaluation and the notes underneath it, and 13 pages of my own handwriting out of a safe in the floor of my shop. The bars started to move. On the right side of that screen, the 4 gray squares of my house sat there and did not have anybody in them. "He is outside," Demetrius said. The exterior view came up. Cade Franklin was standing on my front steps. He was not walking to the vehicle. He was not on the phone anymore. He stood still, with his hands loose at his sides, and he looked not at the road and not at the gate,
but off to his left, along the side of the house, toward the back of the property. His head came up a little and went along the roof line, and then dropped and tracked the gravel path that runs down past the shop. 22%, Demetrius said. Then the passenger door of that SUV opened, and a second man got out. He was bigger, taller across and heavier through the shoulders, and he was wearing a dark jacket on a morning that did not call for one. He came around the front of the vehicle, pulling on a pair of work gloves. "Who is that?" I said. Demetrius watched him for about 2 seconds. "I do not know," he said. That was the first thing my son had said all morning that he did not have an answer behind. The two of them started at the shop. They went through it and came out. They went in the pump house and came out. They worked the equipment shed and then the old seed barn. And they did it in a pattern from the house outward, the way you go over a field so you do not cover the same ground twice. "How long?" I said. Demetrius looked at the bars and then at the picture. 3 minutes to finish this," he said. "Maybe 5 before they get to the turn row." 51%. I looked out east along the row we were sitting in. About 200 yards down it, the path from the shop comes in between 2 big ones that my grandfather said himself the biggest on the place, with their tops grown together over the gap. You cannot see this bench from the shop. You cannot see it from anywhere on that path until you come through that gap and out the other side. 200 yards. And somewhere out on a turn row road, less than 10 minutes from my gate, Ibrahim Anthony had been sitting in a vehicle since 11 o'clock the night before, with a team and a signed warrant waiting on 3 bars to finish moving. He had been out there while I stood at my counter with my coffee. He had been out there while I watched her car go past the mailbox and told myself that nothing about this morning was any different from the last 2,000 of them. 78%. I have sat still in a deer stand before daylight. I have sat still in a bank office while a man decided about my life. I have never in all my years sat as still as I sat on that bench, watching a red bar move across a screen, while 2 men worked their way toward me through my own trees. 90. And then from up the row, from a good deal closer than 300 feet, came a sound I have known my entire life. Dry wood, 1 clean crack under a boot. Neither one of us moved. My son's hand came onto my forearm. Not a grab, just the weight of his fingers through my sleeve, and it said everything that needed saying. Do not shift. Do not turn your head. Do not put one sound into this row that does not already belong here. We sat exactly as we were. The laptop was turned away from the row. My hands stayed on my knees. There was a fly working somewhere behind my ear, and I let it work. Up the row, I could hear them playing in that dry October air, 2 sets of boots going through the leaf litter, not hurrying. Evenly spaced, the sound a man makes when he is covering ground on a plan he brought with him. I did not look toward the path. I tracked them by sound, the way you track a dog you cannot see. And up the row, where the 2 big trees come together over the path, a man stopped walking. Complete, Demetrius said. He said it the same way he had said everything else all morning. But I have spent 40 years reading men who have trained themselves not to show much, and I saw the thing at the corner of his jaw let go. Up the row, Cade Franklin had not moved. He was standing in the gap between those 2 big trees with the moss hanging down past his shoulder, and he was doing what he had done in every room of my house. He was reading it. His eyes went along the low fence line and across the face of the old seed barn, and then they started out across the open ground toward the east rows. He had not seen us. The angle of that bench to that gap put us just off the side of what a man standing there can see. 3 steps forward and we were in front of him. From where his boots were, we were not there at all, but he was working it out. I watched him work it out. His head came around toward the rows, and that is when the sound came from the front of the place. It was not what I expected, and I have thought about that since. There was no wailing. Nobody came up my gravel with a siren going. What came across that property was 1 short, controlled tone, maybe 2 seconds of it. The kind that is built to carry clean across open ground and be heard by particular people without waking up a whole county. In that still October air, it went through the grove like something dropped in water. Cade Franklin's head turned toward the house. For 1 full second, he did not move at all. I could see it from 200 yards. A man whose attention has been taken away from him from the outside and who is not used to that. Then he went. He turned hard back toward the east fence line, toward the service gap he had come in through, because that was his way out, and he had already walked it once. He made about 8 yards. 2 men came around opposite ends of that old seed barn at the same time and put themselves on the path in front of him. They did not run, they did not holler. They simply arrived, one and then the other, and closed the ground he had left. He stopped. He looked at them. He looked back over his shoulder. He looked at them again. He did not try anything after that. The big man in the gloves had been coming along about 40 feet behind him. When Franklin stopped, he stopped. When he understood what he was standing in, he put both hands up and went down on his knees in the leaf litter without one word being said to him, and he stayed there. That is a man who ran through his choices fast and did not care for any of them. Inside of about 90 seconds, Cade Franklin was in restraints on the turn row of my grandfather's farm. On the path he had been walking down to get to a bench he did not know was there. He never struggled, and he never said a word. He stood there with his hands behind him and looked off east at the trees with a face I could not read from where I was sitting. Whatever he had figured that morning would look like, it did not look like that. I stood up off my father's bench. My legs were not good under me right at first, and I put my hand on the plank for a second, and Demetrius did not reach for me, and I was grateful to him for it. Then I walked away from the bench, up the row, and I stopped at the 3rd tree from the end. That is the biggest one on the place. My grandfather set it in the spring of 1952, and it has been through everything that has come across this land since. I put my hand flat on the trunk of it. I stood there like that a while. There were men talking somewhere behind me, and vehicles coming up the gravel, and a radio going, and I did not turn around for any of it. The bark was rough and cold under my palm, and about a foot over my hand there was a place where the trunk goes over a scar it grew across 60 years ago. I did not say anything, not out loud and not in my head either, or not in words. Then I took my hand down and went back. Ibrahim Anthony met us at the end of the row. He had gotten heavier through the chest since he ate at my table, and there was gray in his beard, and he had credentials hanging on a strap. He put his hand out, and I took it. "Mr. Hartman," he said. It all landed. 3 confirmations inside the window. We have got the whole thing. Then he looked at Demetrius, and something went across his face and went off it again. My son did not smile back. He stood in the middle of that row with his hands at his sides, and I understood that whatever was coming to him was not going to get here for a good while yet. Ibrahim understood it too. He let it be. Then he looked down at his phone and read something, and turned to the man next to him and said 2 words. "Where is she?" The man scrolled. "Lodge, outside Grenada," he said. "Lobby, about 4 minutes ago." They let her call me. I have thought about why they allowed it, and I believe I understand. Whatever she said would be on the record. My phone rang at 11:17. I let it go twice before I answered because I wanted those 2 seconds. I wanted to be standing up with my feet under me. "Whatever you think you have," she said. That voice, smooth as a table. "I know exactly what I have," I said. 3.5 years of recordings, 11 documents, a policy for $3 million, and a man in Bolivar County whose file just got opened back up. 3 seconds of nothing. Then she changed. It came out softer, slower. The worried voice, the careful one, the one I had been answering to for 6 years without ever once asking myself why it worked on me. "Daddy Reuben," she said, "listen to me. You are not well. You have not been well in a long time, and Demetrius has been sitting in that house alone with this, and what he is telling you is not what it looks like." I stood in my own grove and looked at 400 acres of my grandfather's trees. "Carla," I said, "a man does not lose his place to somebody who comes over the fence in the night." She did not say anything. "He loses it to whoever he handed the keys to," I said. "And she does not take it from him. She waits at his own table until he hands it over himself." I could hear her breathing. Then somebody spoke low behind her, and the line went dead. I brought the phone down and looked at it a second and put it in my shirt pocket. Demetrius was standing about 6 feet away watching me.
Behind him, they were walking Cade Franklin up the gravel toward the vehicles.
"Is it over?" my son said.
I looked at him a long moment, both feet on the ground, shoulders square, standing in the middle of a grove his great-grandfather planted.
"Not yet," I said, "but it will be."
We did not sleep in that house that night. The place was a federal scene and would be for 4 more days. Pastor McKenzie came and got us, and we stayed in his back bedroom, and his wife fed us, and neither one of them asked a single question which I will not forget.
Ibrahim called at 22 minutes after 4 that afternoon. "He is talking," he said. Cade Franklin gave a full account. He confirmed the warehouse. He confirmed going in there the night before with a wrench and pulling the anchor bolts out of that loft platform and setting the plates back. He confirmed that the man he intended to walk out on it the next morning was me, and that my son getting there early on a delivery was, in his own words, an outcome he had not planned for and could not correct once it was moving. He confirmed finding Carla and placing her, and he described that the way a man describes a business he built, which is apparently how he had always understood it. He confirmed Pratt and the conservatorship. He confirmed the last bottle and who sold him what was in it. And he confirmed Ryland Bravo. Ibrahim said there was one point in that room, about 2 hours in, where Franklin stopped and asked how much audio they actually had. When the agent across the table told him 3.5 years, cross-referenced against 2 years of federal financial work, Franklin sat there about half a minute without saying anything. Then he started talking again. There was nothing left worth protecting. When the call ended, I set the phone down on Pastor McKenzie's kitchen table. Demetrius was looking out the window at the light going off the field across the road. He sat with his back straight, the way he had sat for 7 years, except that now it was just how he sat. He nodded one time, down and back up. The nod of a man marking something off a list he has been working a long while. He did not say anything, and I did not ask him to. Her lawyers came at us inside of 2 days. A firm out of Jackson I had never heard of, which told me it had been hired fast and for one purpose: 4 pages. The argument was that my son had faked 7 years in a wheelchair to avoid obligations, and that I was a cognitively impaired old man being manipulated by him, and that nothing I had said or signed in the past week ought to be given any weight at all. I read it twice, the way I read everything. Then I laughed. Not much of one, and not with any warmth in it. "She is still playing," I said. Demetrius read it and called Ibrahim and read him the 2 claims flat like a feed bill. Ibrahim was quiet a second, and then he said 3 words: "Let her play." The lab report came a week later in a plain envelope. 6 pages, and the first 2 of them were chain of custody. I went on to the meat of it. The benzodiazepine level in my blood was well above anything a doctor prescribes for anybody, consistent with continuous administration over a period of years. The second finding was a compound I had never heard of, and it did not appear in any prescription record with my name on it anywhere. What it does, in small doses over time, is quiet down the part of the brain that recognizes a pattern and trusts itself about it. It does not knock a man out. It does not make him sick. It makes the voice that says something is wrong here a little harder to hear. At the bottom of the 4th page, the reviewing physician had written 1 sentence, and I read that one 3 times. At the documented concentration levels, continued exposure for another 6 months would have carried a high probability of permanent cognitive impairment. 6 months. I folded that page back along its crease and sat with it in my hands a while in a borrowed bedroom in a preacher's house, 69 years old. If my son had not been pulling 4 and 5 tablets out of a bottle every few weeks for 3 years and putting the right ones back in, if he had not gone into my room at 1 o'clock that Thursday morning, 6 more months and there would have been nothing left to save. Demetrius had a panel run too. Different compounds, same purpose. Nothing in it belonged in any recovery protocol anywhere. They had been keeping my son in that chair after his body had already started coming back. Graham Pratt went in with the prosecutors inside of 3 weeks and gave them all of it. He got his sentence cut for it. He will not practice medicine again as long as he lives. Carla took an agreement rather than sit through a trial. 22 years. Her attorneys worked on it 6 weeks, and she signed it and did not look up. Cade Franklin would not take anything. His own lawyer advised against it, and he overrode his own lawyer, which is the most honest thing I know about the man. The jury was out 4 hours. Between the federal counts and what Bolivar County brought on the Bravo matter, he will not come out. And the land came back. Every one of those 11 instruments was voided as the product of undue influence executed by a man under documented impairment. The court found that the property had never legally changed hands at all. The easement went. The option went. The amendment went. 400 acres, not 1 acre. Ever. The day they let us back in the house, I did not unpack anything, and I did not sit down. I walked through the front room to the mantel, and I reached up and turned that jar back square, the way it has sat since before I was born. That is the whole of what I did that afternoon. It took about 4 seconds. I want to tell you what I understand now that I did not understand standing in my kitchen that Thursday morning with a cup of coffee in my hands. I spent my whole life believing that what a man is worth is measured by whether he can still carry it himself. My father believed it. I watched it take him apart by inches, and I promised myself I would never make my children carry me. And I kept that promise so hard that when somebody finally did start taking things from me, the very last person on this earth I was going to say a word to about it was my own son. That belief is what they used, not the pills. The pills only made it easier. My boy laid on a cold floor in the dark for 4 years to hold me up. And there is not one thing in that which took anything away from me. Some mornings I still stand at that counter and go back over the days I nearly had the thought and let it go. That has not left me, and I do not believe it is going to. But the trees are still standing. And harvest came on schedule that October, same as it has every year since 1952. 2 Octobers later, first light. The rows are wet, and the air has that cold, clean edge on it that comes off the delta before the sun gets up over the tree line. My son is out at the North 80 with a clipboard, walking the set, stopping every so often to turn a hole over in his hand. I'm on the porch with a cup of coffee I ground myself. Inside on the mantel there is a glass jar with red dirt in it. It sits square. I have had 2 years to think about what I would say to a man sitting where I was sitting, and it comes down to this. I believed all my life that what a man is worth is measured by whether he can still carry the whole thing by himself. I held that so tight that when somebody finally started taking from me, the one person I would not tell was the person who loved me most. That belief did not protect my dignity. It handed it over. Dignity is not being unable to be helped. It is what you do the morning you find out you were wrong, and whether you get up out of the chair or stay in it. I will not tell you I understand why any of it happened, but I believe God keeps a man's mind for him when he cannot keep it himself. I believe God had a boy lying on a cold floor in the dark, holding on for both of us 4 years, while I sat at a breakfast table calling it an ordinary morning. And I believe God is still not finished with what he means to do with the years I have left. So let me ask you honestly, if you had been sitting at that table, feeling something slip, would you have said it out loud to somebody who loves you? Or would you have told yourself you were only getting old? Tell me in the comments. I would like to know.